Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the BCCK's lunch webinar. And it's our first ever webinar together with our colleagues in Japan and Taiwan. So very exciting to have this as our first cross-regional webinar with these fellow chambers. And our topic today, as you might expect, is on COVID-19 and obviously looking at this from a regional perspective on the situation that we find ourselves in the three different markets. So in terms of the detail of the discussion, we'll have an update from each of us on what life is like at the moment in terms of the virus, and also some of the government directives and actions that have been taken with regards to the outbreaks, also the impact generally on our members and also the business environment. There are some survey results that can be shared to that effect as well, and then also potential exit strategy and also business recovery in the region. So I think it's worth stating that we're not obviously medical experts. We're also not super on the in when it comes to our respective governments, but I think what we are aware of is the sentiment and the feedback of our members. So I think it'll be very interesting for us to share that with our respective members. And so on today's panel, we have David Bickle. So David's the president there in Japan, and also Steve Parker, who is the CEO of the British Chamber of Commerce in Taipei, and then myself. So I'll be acting as the moderator just in order to facilitate the discussion. But of course, we're all going to be equally taking part here. We just, in terms of some logistics, we have a Q&A function there. So if any of you have any questions, please just click on that and type your question. If you want to address it to a particular person, feel free to write that into the question. If not, then I will address it to whoever it's most pertinent to address it to, or indeed to all of us.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sean. I just want to say thank you for the invite. I think it's one of the weird sort of side effects of the whole COVID-19 thing at this time is it's actually encouraged a lot of regional cooperation like this. People can get online, and so, you don't want to say it's it's a benefit, but it's a kind of a side product, something, and a lot of companies we found are doing the same thing, that what they're actually getting into is things that they should have done for a number of years. This has forced them to kind of get into that and get them going. So a roundabout way of saying thanks for inviting us here, but it's also we see these opportunities for people to cooperate regionally, which is great. We're in a strange position in Taiwan, and we are in a very, very, very positive frame. Thank you for putting up the first one. If I just run down this quickly, sometimes people don't really know about the numbers in the Taiwan economy, but we're 21st largest economy in the world. According to the IMF, we have a purchasing power by parity of about number 19. If you don't know what we do here, we're more than 62% based on services, a lot of industry and manufacturing still at 36%, and a very strong agricultural area, but at 1.8% of the economy, but very, very strong. The one that's interesting to have a look at is kind of 2.7% GDP growth in 2019. Our best kind of guesses from members and other people are putting this for 2020 at about 0.5 to 1.5, very optimistic. So the biggest influence, I think, of the COVID-19 is going to be on the Taiwan's GDP, although we're in a fairly safe position. And I'll get into some of the numbers on Taiwan in a moment. But unemployment still remains low. People are fairly confident here. But the biggest influence will be on GDP, and we are an export economy. So that's obviously going to affect a lot of what we do. And maybe if I could just move on to the next slide. Taiwan has about, at the moment, the last number I saw was 428 confirmed cases only. We've had 6 deaths. It's probably just about the safest place you can be in the world right now. Why is this? And I think, a lot of people, sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's just, the nature of people kind of, Japan had the cruise ship, there's been a lot of influence of external factors. But I think if you see behind this slide here, there's a picture of Chen Jianren. One of the reasons that we've been very lucky here is that he is the vice president. He's also an epidemiologist, and he was very, very involved in 2003 with the SARS epidemic. Taiwan was hit very badly in 2003. And what this did was it forced Taiwan to think about what would happen if something like this ever occurred again. Um, and I've got some notes in here because I want to go through these fairly carefully. It's allowed Taiwan to kind of be prepared ahead of time. From that moment in 2003, we constantly thought about what if this happened again? And so, December last year, basically, we started health screening because there were rumors of the thing that going down. We shut down flights from certain locations. We had our first confirmed case in January. We started this mask rationing very, very early on, which is something that I think some of the population weren't too happy about it. But what it's done is it's allowed the masks to be used in the locations and in the centers where they needed to be used. And it's made people aware of kind of just how valuable they are. It's also allowed Taiwan to develop this kind of international medical diplomacy by using some of our now oversupply of masks to be able to donate to various different regions around the world. So it's, in some ways, it's been a positive political move on Taiwan to kind of keep the masks available. We had, as David was talking about, school closures and obviously travel bans. Initially brought in for certain places where they were high risk, but ultimately shutting down all inward flights and all non-resident people from coming to the country. So that's been fairly, it's been fairly effective. If you look at the 428 confirmed cases, something like 86% of those are from people coming from somewhere else. Now, they may be Taiwan residents, but they may have lived overseas or been stationed overseas or whatever, returning to the country and bringing it from other places. So Taiwan has been very effective at locking down the source of the virus and keeping it to a minimum. We hope it continues, we really do. Some of the measures, and maybe I can share for other people who are listening, some of the measures that the government has brought in very, very early on, very quickly, was about sharing best practices. Straight away contacting all of the kind of sister cities, sister relationships all around the world and just sharing immediately. Here's what we've done. Here's what we're doing. Here are the resources we have. And through that exchange have also developed, had some really good inward information as well. Even before certain countries started their daily briefings, we've had from, I think, early January this year, we've had daily CDC briefings about what's happening, what's going on, what number of cases we've had, etc. And so the population has been fairly well informed from a very early point. The other point about what Taiwan has done is about deployment of medical staff. So very early on, again, we've used government officials, we've used the military to take over certain roles in hospitals. So the administrative function of certain hospitals have been run by non-medical staff. And the medical staff have then been free to look after patients and to create policies. The other thing that was done very early on too was to get all of these kind of SOPs for this process in English. So not only were they in Chinese, but also in English so that the international community, our members, were able to understand immediately what was going on and what was required of them. Implemented a lot of economic measures, again, quite early. The government brought in here things like rent reduction, interest rate cuts, subsidies for business, tax cuts, price reduction for certain essential items, price control on medical items like masks, PPE, this sort of stuff, so they weren't being sold to the highest bidder. Some of the mask manufacturers were actually a little bit upset. They felt like they could have made a lot of money at this time, but the pricing was controlled so that everyone who needed the equipment was able to get the equipment. Hotels and tourism have obviously been hit a lot because of the closing down of the country, but they have been in some small part subsidized by creating these kind of quarantine hotels. Obviously, they're not making as much as they would have with tourists, but the government has been subsidizing them and helping the hotels get through that, but also creating an environment where people who need quarantine can be and kept safe. And also we've been Taiwan has been very strong in the medical and biotech industries. As well as this area of telemedicine, online kind of diagnosis. And these are industries that are actually finding some benefits. And I hate using the word benefit, but there are opportunities for them to develop and to implement stuff that they've been working on for years. David mentioned about teleworking and stuff like that, and that's obviously something that the government here has been promoting very, very heavily. What we found was something similar here. A lot of SMEs who were maybe not necessarily ready for teleworking have had to take this whole process in a very, very short space of time. They've had to go from kind of having nothing in place, a thought, and then suddenly kind of what might have taken them 6 months is now, they've done it in kind of a week where they've converted the entire office to being online, Google or Microsoft Teams, all these different kind of options. And this has been one of the things we've found is the virus has accelerated a lot of timelines, especially for companies that didn't have these kind of emergency measures in place. So what are the good things, the things that we've learned from Taiwan? As I said, we have this experience of handling SARS, which I think has been very, very beneficial for Taiwan. We were hit hard, but we've learned a lot from that. The public in Taiwan is extremely open to wearing masks. In fact, people will tell you off if you're not wearing a mask. So it's one of those things that I think the populace got used to it in 2003 rather. And so now it's just been something that they're very, very used to doing. National health system. I mean, I have to say that Taiwan has one of the best national health systems that I've seen. The average hospital visit would be something like US $5. So people are also used to going to hospitals. They're used to having medical treatment. And the hospitals themselves have responded by developing administrative processes where they are processing things that are not COVID-19 related outside the hospital. So people who have to pick up regular medicines, for instance, are able to pick those up from outside, from administrative personnel. So changing the way they're doing things to make people feel safe, but also kind of implementing new systems. I mean, we have more than, I think, 20,000 hospitals and clinics all around Taiwan. And one of the things that we've also been encouraging too is kind of a triage process of going to local clinics first to assess before going to major hospitals, this has alleviated some of the kind of the threat of overcrowding that may well have been possible. Home quarantine management has been strictly enforced, very important. So we have location tracking systems and all these sort of things, very, very technologically savvy in Taiwan. I'm not saying that nowhere else is, but we've implemented these things fairly quickly. And things like the MRT, like subway, the subway stations have implemented kind of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 measures and informed the public very, very clearly through signs about, what would be in place at each of these different times. So I think from a management point of view, I think there's some really good lessons that can be learned from the Taiwan experience. And I think I'll move through to my next slide, if I may. I just want to talk a very quick little bit about, what we as an organization have had to do. Reflecting what, I said, the Taiwan government has been doing and what business has been doing, we basically have had to move everything online. We've worked from home, we wear masks, we've had to change all of the events, no big events, no physical events. As an organization, a British Chamber of Commerce, where we're used to kind of, I guess, revenues and a lot of stuff coming from our events, we've had to change what we do. And this is, I think, long-term in some ways, this is going to be good for us because we come up with new ways of doing things as we're doing today. Some of you may recognize some of your own members here. We have, I think we have Japan, we have Singapore and some others in the room here as well. And in terms of trade for us, it's the trade work that we do. It's kind of business as usual. People are still interested in Taiwan. Obviously they can't travel, but they're still interested. And so we're continuing the work we do in that area. Maybe I'll move on now, if I could. Move to my next slide. I wanted to share some of we didn't do a specific business survey ourselves because there were a couple of very good ones that were already being done. So we had some information that was shared with us from our member company, Adecco. We also had the Edelman Trust Survey, which was released recently. And we have another member, Independent Marketing and Research Limited, who shared some of the business sentiment regarding COVID-19 with us. One of the interesting ones, if we go from a kind of a macro to a micro perspective, the Independent Marketing and Research does an annual survey of business satisfaction. What they noted was that the 5-year outlook, which was at about 52% positive, has dropped a little bit down to somewhere around 46%. So there's been a slight reduce in kind of people's long-term perspective, but it's still a reasonably optimistic approach to business here. the biggest kind of areas that people viewed as affecting their business. Now, this report hasn't been released yet. This is, as I said, shared with us from Adecco. We can't release the numbers, so I can't put them up on screen for you, but I'll share a couple of kind of the big factors that came out. Most people obviously see it at revenue is the biggest issue. Revenue is down. Some say 5%, some say 7%. Other companies we've spoken to, 30 to 50%, depending on the nature of their business. It's had to involve a whole strategic change. Things have to be done differently. A lot of projects have to be postponed. I mean, we saw just simply doing events and things like that. There's a big influence on that, but a lot of companies have had to put things off until the following year. HR has been influenced quite a lot. Recruitment, obviously. So companies are not taking on new staff. Rather, they're not replacing staff. Somewhere around 60% of companies have said that they will simply maintain the staff that they've got now, and they're not going to be recruiting more people in the future. And a lot of companies are obviously doing things like unpaid leave, trying to use up unpaid leave, forcing people to go on holidays now. With very few companies, around 7% were saying that they would actually have to lay people off. And I think these are more the ones that have had some serious economic impact. The one thing, and I think this maybe was mirrored with what David was talking about, is that most companies would like to see more from the government. I mean, although I think we've had a fairly positive response from the Taiwan government here, I think that a lot of companies would like to see more subsidies, more tax breaks, things like this. And the last thing I want to share about the company was this kind of remote systems. David talked about this as well, implementing remote systems. Most of the large corporates had the ability to kind of get into this very, very quickly. But we found a lot of the SMEs who responded were less strong in this area. And they were finding it difficult to kind of, click straight over to doing things where they'd been used to kind of meeting up with people, traveling when they needed to, etc. To be doing all these things online was making it slightly difficult for them. I'm going to move on to the next one. My next slide, if I may. I just wanted to talk a little bit. We're based inside the embassy here, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what the UK government in Taiwan has been doing, because they've been very supportive. And there's some lessons here as well. First thing, basically supporting UK citizens. And as I'm aware, all of the UK citizens who wanted to get out of Taiwan or needed to get out of Taiwan were able to do so. A lot of news sharing. So the information about COVID-19, what they were doing, how things were developing, all of this. And we did the same thing. We developed new pages on our website. We developed new newsletters so that we can inform and keep in touch with our members in the same way as the UK government was also keeping in touch with UK business and with UK citizens in Taiwan. And setting up a dedicated support team. With Taiwan in the position that it's in now, one of the things that the UK government representatives in Taiwan has been able to do is actually work with Taiwan on procurement. So we have a lot of manufacturing here. We have some surplus in some essential items. And so the UK government has been working with Taiwan manufacturers to try and get supplies to help the UK. So, I mean, we've sourced something like 60 ventilators. We've supported logistics for a donation of 1 million masks that went out to the UK. And at the moment, the Department of International Trade is focusing on the PPE, the personal protective equipment, in particular gowns and stuff like that, to source those so that we can help with the UK. And if I just go to my last slide now. So I think the sentiment in Taiwan is actually fairly positive. We've had low number of cases. We've had a very low number of deaths. We've had some influence from, on the business. But in general, my last message, if you like, is that people are seeing the first half of this year obviously is gone. Second half of this year will be down. Probably 2020 will be, somewhere between, as I said at the beginning, 0.5 to 1.5 GDP only against an original forecast of 2.7. But looking fairly positive for most of the businesses and members that we talk to in terms of 2021. And with that, I'd like to pass it back to Sean. Thank you.